7% yield. That's what everybody chases, but I've seen that same number turn into a 4%. Same building, same price, because people don't read the lease. I'm Mish Daniel with my co-host Sam, and today we're looking at 3 mistakes that turn a good deal into a very expensive mistake. 1, cost a buyer $93,000 before settlement. There's a 4th mistake underneath all 3. Stick with us and hear about it.
Welcome to the Revolve Commercial Podcast. I'm your co-host for today, Samantha Riley, along with our commercial buyer's agent and expert in commercial real estate, Mish Daniel. Well, today we're going to dive into this topic, Mish. I'm really interested and intrigued about this $93,000 number alone, like just that one piece. Because I know that I'm already leading in. I want to know how I don't lose $93,000. But before we get there, walk us through the mindset. Why do people get caught out like this with these big numbers in the first place?
Sam, I'm going to go all the way back to it's not what you know, it's what you don't know. And it's what you don't know that catches you out. So people come into commercial real estate with their residential brains on, their residential instincts. You really need to know about commercial and how commercial works. So even if you've done a deal or two before, these 3 still catch experienced buyers out. They're not beginners. They're not beginner mistakes. They're blind spots. And they could be costly mistakes. In residential, you don't really look at yield, but you kind of work out, and generally it's your gross yield that you're looking at over there. Over here, we're looking at net yield, and it's your building condition, and most of the, most is everything that you can see. In commercial, the lease and the tenant are the asset. So it's the building, the lease, and the tenant. And today, 3 mistakes are rooted in that one huge mismatch, plus a 4th, one underneath them, we'll get into by the end of this chat.
Alrighty. Well, let's start with the one every buyer sees first. It's one that we all know we want, which is the yield.
It's a little bit like seeing something that you really want and just diving in firsthand and going and buying the first one that you want. It's kind of pulling the wool over your eyes. So yes, 7% yield looks great until you go and you ask what kind of lease it is. The bare lease versus triple net. Who actually pays the outgoings, the rates, insurance, maintenance, what the outgoings look like, what the body corporate and strata looks like. The real return can quietly just collapse once the landlord's obligations kick in. So rule of thumb, yield tells you nothing until you actually know what the lease type is and what the small details in the lease is all about.
That's really interesting, that the yield just isn't the yield. That's why we're chatting to you today. So when you say that the real return can drop, how much are we talking in practice?
Look, Sam, it varies from one deal to the next, and I'll give a perfect example. We were looking at a shopping center, a fairly large shopping center, and when we started digging into the tenancies, there were 6 tenants in this one in particular. The agent was boasting that it was 100% net yielding leases. Well, in fact, it wasn't. And we found out of the 6 leases that 4 of them were between 30 to 50% net, which means that
That's a big difference.
That's a massive difference, massive difference. So when we worked out the calculations, and this is all about the numbers. Commercial is all about the numbers. That property income dropped by about $60,000, and $60,000 made a huge effect on the sale price at the end of the day. So it wasn't a 6%. This one was a supposed 6% yielding property. In actual fact, it was a 5.3% yielding property, which makes a huge impact on your lending, on your borrowing capacity, on everything, and your cash flow at the end of the day.
Sorry, Mish, what's coming up in my mind is, can they just say whatever they want?
They can't really, but you are dealing with sellers and buyers, sellers and agents that really want to sell their property, and they don't always disclose all the finer details. And with all due respect, often they don't even know this. I mean, we've been confronted with, I'll tell you a story. We were buying a property, a lovely warehouse property, and we got to the point where we were doing due diligence and we were looking at the accounts, and we noticed that on the accounts, and this was 100% net lease, on the accounts, the property managers hadn't been charging 100% outgoings. They'd only been charging all the face value outgoings, but they hadn't been charging all the periphery, all the additional outgoings, which means that the tenants hadn't been paying them, the owner had been paying them, and he never questioned why his cash flow was so tight. When it came to selling the property, we said, hang on, wait a minute. We're going to be buying a property where the tenants are accustomed to only paying 50% of the outgoings. We went back to them and we said, you change that first, and then we'll continue with this deal.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's really a matter of looking at the lease and your statements with a fine microscope.
So, Mish, what's the one lease term a buyer should ask for on day one before they even look at the numbers?
I'm going to say check your tenancy schedule. So often a buyer might look at a lease and say, yep, it all looks good. But if you don't have a look at the tenancy schedule, particularly if you're doing a multi-tenanted property, you want to have a look on the tenancy schedule to see what the buyers, what the tenants have actually been paying. Because not what they say they've been paying. You want to see those tenancy schedule that reflects the actual dollar amount that's been coming into the account. Because if that doesn't stack up to what they're saying in the front end, you're doing those numbers. It's almost like a reverse due diligence to do the numbers and make sure that the numbers that you are getting are the numbers that you should be getting.
So that's the number on the page, but even if the lease checks out, there's another layer that sometimes buyers skip, and that's where this $93,000 story comes in, isn't it?
It certainly is. So this was one of those issues where it was actually a client of mine that was busy looking at a property, and she was one of our mentoring clients, and she was very proud about the property that she found, and she was just about to sign on the dotted line. She was about to go to contract. She'd done all her due diligence, and she was about to go to contract. And when I had a look at her sinking fund, I said to her, there's a negative 93 on the sinking fund. Have you looked into that? And she said, yeah, I saw that, but I don't think it's anything serious. And I said to her,
I think anything with $93,000 is serious, right?
Exactly. So I said to her, did you do a strata report? And she said, no. I said, strata sinking fund, no, didn't do that. I said, well, actually, you're going to be paying for that $93,000. So how do you feel about that? And she kind of went, what? And re-looked at it all over again. Turns out that the sinking fund was $93,000 in debt, and any new owner that would be taking over that property would basically become liable for that debt. So it might not be in the numbers anywhere, but you got to look for it.
Okay. So if someone's sitting there right now listening with a strata report, how would they even know what they're looking at is a problem?
Well, I would say the first thing to do is if you're about to buy a property and you've gone on contract, then order a professional audit on the admin and sinking fund. That would be the first thing to look at. Secondly, have a look at your figures, at your statements, and see where the negatives are. See if there's any discussion about capital works, and they might frame it differently. They might call it different names, but essentially, sinking fund is capital works. So if there are works coming up of fixing balconies, repairs on lifts, on staircases, things like that, you want to be looking for that, or roofs, or painting. That is most definitely going to add special levies. Have a look in the minutes to see if there's any discussion about special levies, because that is going to become your liability.
Yeah. So that's the paperwork side. But even with a clean report and a solid lease, you can still get the actual tenant wrong, can't you? Have I got that right?
You have, indeed. You can get the tenants wrong. So you're not just buying a building. You're buying the strength of the tenant. You're not buying the business, but you really are buying something, a structure that your tenant is in, and you want to make sure that your tenant is good and solid and stable. And again, Sam, I'm going to say, depending on your strategy, because if you're looking for an uplift property, then and you're quite prepared to wear the fact that you might lose your tenant, or your tenant's not very strong, or doesn't pay very well, then there's an opportunity for you. But you need to know that up front, so that you can negotiate that into your upfront price. Because if you do lose your tenant, you're going to have all holding costs and agent fees and all that sort of thing. So you do want to look at the certainty of your tenant. You want to look at the lease term remaining, the covenant of the tenant, the financial strength, the likelihood of renewal. If you're buying a tenanted property, you definitely want to see some longevity out of that. And then again, what happens if the tenant walks? What is your vacancy risk? What is the vacancy uptake in that area? What's your releasing costs, your marketing costs, your agent cost? You're not just looking at a great building plus a shaky tenant. It's a very different investment. What does it look like on paper? What does it look like in reality? What is your strategy? Are you looking for a vanilla property that's going to be a property that's going to sustain you long term, or are you looking for something that you can do something with and do uplift on it?
So with all of that you just said, is that something that a buyer can realistically assess on their own? Or, how is there a different kind of digging? Like, how do you come up with that?
Look, Sam, I think it's education. It's knowing, like I said earlier, it's knowing what you don't know. So how do you know to ask these things and to look for this? And I've given you a couple of examples of people that thought they knew what they were doing, and almost make very expensive mistakes. So you don't know what you don't know. So you can't be asking the questions if you don't know them. And this is the beauty about being in mentoring, and learning those questions, learning those things. Somebody once asked me, we were talking about a property, and I can't remember exactly what it was. And they said to me, Mish, how do you know that? And I said, well, it's not in the textbooks, but it's out of the 40 years of experience that I've had in purchasing commercial property.
Absolutely.
It takes me back to something that happens maybe 20 years ago.
Yep.
And I just remembered it,
Yeah. Real world experience is so, so valuable.
Yes. That's what it's really about.
Yeah.
And I can do it fearlessly. I see it, I deal with it, and for me, it's everyday sort of occurrence. For the client, on the other hand, it's a little bit of a, scary experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's a red flag in a lease that tells you a tenant might not renew?
Good question. So I'll give you an example. We were busy reviewing a property once upon a time, and it was a good solid tenant, national tenant in fact, but in clause 3.8.3.1, there was in fine print, there was a little clause that said that the tenant had the ability to revoke their lease and give 6 months notice. But it was a 5 plus 5 year lease.
Mm-hmm.
And I just questioned that. I actually, it really got me boggled, because I thought, why would somebody sign a 5 plus 5 year lease if they really wanted to be there? But that is an escape clause. That's a get out of jail clause. When I spoke to my solicitor about it, he said, "Oh, this just nullifies the lease completely. It means that you've got a 6-month lease, a 6-month term on your lease, and the tenant can vacate at any point, give you notice, and you've got 6 months." So when banks and valuers look at that, if they pick it up, they're going to value that as a 6-month lease term.
Yeah.
That is one huge red flag. The other thing to look at is, like I said, net versus gross. And if it is true net or triple net, you need to check that it truly is triple net, and not percentages off.
Mm-hmm.
So those are, there are 100 red flags that we could look at on a lease, but those are the ones that scream out. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've talked about yield, you've talked about paperwork, you've talked about tenant. That's 3, if I've counted right. But you did mention a 4th mistake underneath all of this. What is it? What's the 4th mistake?
So the 4th mistake is all 3 come from the commercial due diligence using residential mindset. The real mistake underneath all of them is having somebody who actually works in commercial sense, checking the deal before you contracting. Even buyers who read the leases, read the strata reports, and check the tenors. If they're doing it without a commercial specific eye, you really need to have that commercial knowledge behind you. They're still going to be exposed because they don't know what they don't know. What separates a good outcome from an expensive one is 1.5 to 5 million level specifically. So enough capital at risk, that's a blind spot, is genuinely costly, not just annoying.
No, that's anything that hurts the back pocket is not just annoying. That's one way to say it. Yeah, I'm very big on you don't know what you don't know. So if someone's listening and realizing that they don't know what they don't know and realizing they might be sitting on one of these blind spots right now, Mish, where should they go?
Best thing is to reach out to us via the website. There's all sorts of great information on the website. There's a wealth grow plan. Click on any of the links, book a call, reach out to us, and let's see if we can help you out.
So that's revolvecommercial.com.au. All the links will be in the show notes below. Mish, thanks so much for sharing today. This was a great episode, and I look forward to learning whatever it is that you teach us on the next episode.
Thanks, Sam. Always lovely chatting. Thank you.